Hello everyone, this is Jacob Hopio, the producer of The Apex. In this episode, Jan and I sit down and talk to James Warnken. James is our data and SEO practitioner. James grew up in Canton, graduated from Walsh University, and has a passion for figuring out new and innovative ways to help businesses grow online using the power of Google. In this episode, we take a turn to the philosophical side, and we discuss James slowly losing his vision as a kid, the power of reflecting on your own humanity, and the ways that you can use self-reflection as a tool in your daily life. If you want to support us, there are 3 ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/theapexpodcast. Second, visit our merch line that is proudly partnered with Envision Clothing Company at envisionclothingcompany.com. The final one is completely free. All we ask is if you learned something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share it with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
What is up, Apex Chasers? It's been a long time since we've recorded an episode like this. Most of the time, you guys are used at this point to hearing my voice followed closely by John Kuntz or Justin Woods or the Shways Bahati. But today, we are reviving the Apex podcast with none other than the OG producer of the Apex podcast and the voice that you have fallen in love with at the beginning of every single intro, the Mr. Jacob Popio. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thank you.
We've been busy the last couple of months, to say less.
And RJ's quarantined to his own domain.
Yeah. So for everybody that's listening right now, man, ever since, when was quarantine happen? March? Like March 17th or something like that. I think it hit in Ohio. It's been crazy. I mean, the entire world's flipped upside down. We're all dealing with a whole bunch of stuff, but we've been in the background making moves, making things happen, right? Because when March hit, I remember Jake and I were talking about a couple of different things. And at the time, I was self-quarantining in a Walsh dorm with a whole bunch of equipment. We had no idea whether or not Apex was even going to survive the next couple of months, right? And today's episode is really a testament to the amount of work that Jake, RJ, and I have really put in over the last couple of months. And then our guest today, over the last less than like 60 days. No, it's been over 2 months now, I think. September 16th. That's when we hired you. I have that date like forever ingrained in my head. But
It's your anniversary.
it is your anniversary. Yeah. I'm never going to let you forget it. Wait a second. What day is today? Oh, it's the 18th. We missed it. Happy belated anniversary, James. And with that, I kind of spoiled the whole, guest intro thing, but I would like to officially welcome to Apex Communications Network's team. Not that you haven't already been officially welcomed in hustling, but to the guests that are listening to the podcast, everybody out there listening, I'd like you to meet our lead data analyst, Mr. James Warnken. James?
Hello. It's been a blast over the last 2 months, and it's only going to continue to get better. So
Yeah.
let's go.
This is going to be a blast. So why don't we just start off, James, with introducing to everybody who you are and where you're from.
So I'm from Canton, Ohio. I've been in Canton my entire life. Recently graduated from Walsh University
Rollcast.
with a bachelor's in marketing. And I've been doing data, SEO, all of that stuff for like 4 or 5 years. Before that, I really didn't do a whole lot. So this is where I fell into. And once I fell and caught my feet, I jumped even further into it. So.
Yeah, I would say so. It's definitely been we did not dip our toes in the pool like we were anticipating. We dipped the pinky toe in. We're like, oh, this is fine. Dive. Like, didn't know whether it was the deep end, the shallow end, or anything. Like, at some point, just a switch flipped, and we decided to just jump into the pool cannonball style.
Right. I was supposed to only have like 60 hours in the first 30 days.
Yeah, something like that.
That lasted all of like 4 days.
Yeah, 2 weeks. I think on average, you've been, well, I mean, for everybody that's listening, ironically, James is like our highest paid staff member at this point, right? Because like the amount of work that this man puts in on a daily basis is just insane. And what I really want to make today's episode about
The scrappy machine.
is less about scrappy. Yes. Is less about the technical side about what James does, but really the why behind who James is and why he does what he does. Cause I really think that that's the most important piece. Like when we conducted our interview, I remember sitting there and I had known about you for a short period of time, through, some of the things that you had done on the side. Because I mean, the statement just now that came out of your mouth, like before that, I didn't do a whole lot is complete horseshit. Like started a clothing brand in school, use that to pay tuition fees,
Well, before that, I wasn't really doing like high school
Raj,
wise.
okay.
Once I get into college, like the switch flipped in my head. Yeah.
So why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about, because me and you have a very similar, I guess, chip. We always talk about the chip on our shoulder, right? So, let's go back to high school and talk about some of the things that you dealt with during that time and really what created that chip, and why you're such a motivated person now to impact people's lives.
Well, I think you have to start by like setting the stage with that I have a visual disability. I am technically legally blind, but that like in high school, that was like my excuse. And I would always say, well, I'm blind, I can't do this, or I've been told I can't do this. And once I got into college and started exploring what was outside of the classroom is really when that switch flipped. And I was like, well, that doesn't mean shit. What they tell me I can and can't do does not matter. And I ever since I realized that in the professional field, that it wasn't going to stop me from getting the job I wanted, that it wasn't going to stop me from earning the salary I wanted, that like whatever, like that didn't matter. For certain things, like, yeah, I can't drive a car. Oh, well, I have people around me that accommodate that aspect for me, but
You can still skateboard, though.
I still ride a skateboard. I still play basketball. I play video games. Like, there is not very much that the typical person does that I don't also do.
Right.
And in high school, I kind of accepted that, but it was only until I graduated that I truly accepted that.
Now, when you say, do everything that a normal person does, right? That you use the word normal there, but there's a statement that I'm fascinated by when it comes to your mentality, right? And you said that you transitioned from I'm blind, but to I'm blind and, right? Why don't we talk about that for a little bit?
So I didn't even that didn't really hit me until a couple weeks after I was at Apex, and like just being surrounded by younger people that are just as hungry as I am to make a difference and actually impact those around us. I didn't really realize it, but I almost went from like using it as an excuse to using it as like a power move when I'm talking to people, because to that point I was like, yeah, I'm blind, but I still do SEO. I still work on a computer. I still go out and ride my skateboard. And now it's kind of like, yeah, I have a vision problem, and that's never stopped me before. Look at what I've been able to do with having to do this on top of that.
Right.
So it's more of like, I've almost taken that extra step that a lot of people don't even have to take to get to where I am. And now I'm starting to realize that like it's made me even hungrier. It's made me more motivated. Like everything I do, that plays a factor into, but it just means I have to dive that much deeper into everything that I do.
Right.
I can't just half-ass something.
And I think it's intriguing because, me and Jacob, right, for example, we've never been blind. I mean, I'm half blind. Like my left eye is essentially legally blind. I had to go through 3 different waiver processes to get into the military. But my right eye's still 20/20, so I can see. But we recorded an episode, and if you're listening to this right now and you're dealing with a bunch of anxiety or you're dealing with any mental health issues, we'll link this episode in the show notes, but you should go back and listen to the How to Deal with Anxiety podcast that me and Jacob recorded in Jake's basement. Because that's kind of our chip, that's kind of our driver. For me, it was being a freshman homeschool kid with a weird accent in a school that just went open enrollment and was like a battleground, right? And dealing with that mental, break or that anxiety and pressure. Right. And then for Jake, for the listeners, Jake, why don't you explain like a little bit of your background as well?
Well, I think a lot of my anxieties stemmed from when I was in 7th grade. I was diagnosed with diabetes and celiac disease, so it's trying to find that new normalcy. So I feel like maybe you felt that way too. Just throughout time, you kind of transition yourself from thinking that your impairments will be held against you and almost be used as crutches. But
Right.
then you generate this new normalcy. You told me this the other day. You just feel like you're normal. You can't even like tell that you're blind. It's just like what you perceive your life to be.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah, didn't know I was blind until I went to go see a doctor.
Yeah,
I think that's
right.
what he said the other day.
And that all started when I was 9. So like I was in like 4th grade. Like I didn't know what it meant. Like to me, I was still perfectly like everybody else that I went to school with. It was only until like all of my papers were twice the size and I had to go to a different classroom to take a test or whatever. And like that being like taken out of a normal setting just because of that kind of made me think I was different. But like now that I look back on it, it was like, that's what I needed. Even though it is different, it's what you need. Like everybody needs something different. Like for you, it's gluten-free products. For you, it might be
My random meditations in the middle
right
of the day.
meditations or writing in a journal or something like that. For me, it was going to a different classroom so that I could use the time I needed to read my papers that were 3 times the size of everybody else's. Or
I wonder, like, we opened this up and, I think about this all the time. What would I say to me, 13-year-old me getting bullied, like not seeing the other side of the light, to the point where from 13 to 16, I went from the 13-year-old kid that was being bullied to the 16-year-old getting pulled over at 2:00 in the morning because I was addicted to Percocet and was trying to get drugs, like that's where that path led me. And so I think all the time, like from where I'm sitting now, what would I go back and try to convey to 13-year-old me and say, hey, it's going to be okay. If you can do X, Y, or Z, what are some of those things? And this is an open floor. I mean, this is to both of you guys.
I would have just told myself that what you're doing now, once you hit 20, it literally is not going to matter. Because all of that like uncomfortable feeling, all of that like nervousness of am I going to get called out in front of the class because I can't see to answer the question that they're asking because it's up on the whiteboard. Like none of those feelings or like way of thinking matter anymore. And that's kind of switched for me when I got to college. And I was like, I realized like all of those kids that I was in high school with, elementary school, middle school with, I no longer see or talk to or hear from any of them. And now I'm in college with an entirely new group of people around me. Once I graduate, I'm not going to see or hear or talk to them either. So it's really like about understanding yourself and that what other people think around you. Once you get to a certain age, you can kind of pick and choose who is around you more consistently. If it's somebody that looks at it and kind of gives you the pity route and kind of uses that to make themselves feel better or anything like that, make you feel down, like that, you control that once you get out of the high school era.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, I think I wouldn't tell my 13-year-old self anything because deep down, I believe that it would be okay. And I think that is the hope that everybody has, that there is something better. You just can't lose sight of that hope. So I wouldn't tell him that it's going to be okay, everything will work out. That is true. I'm just going to say, keep the faith, keep the hope. And yeah, in the future, it doesn't matter because it is the past.
Right.
But it does matter because it makes you who you are.
Amen.
So all of that anxiety that you had, not being able to see the board when they called on you, that gave you the chip on your shoulder where you're able to push yourself now
Right.
and actually be successful.
Right.
So every path that you go through, it does matter, but it doesn't matter in a destructive sense that people think it is.
Right. And that's like when people ask, like, is there anything that can fix it? No, there's not. But if there was, I more than likely wouldn't even do it anyway because I'm happy where I'm at now. I'm not sitting there
Yeah.
thinking about the what ifs and the what could my life be like if I didn't start losing my sight or any of that anymore. It's more what am I going to do now and moving forward.
Exactly.
Right, right.
People ask me if I would cure myself from diabetes if I could. And I said, I don't think I would because this is who I am.
Right.
I've accepted it. This is who I'm meant to be.
Right. Well, and I think that outside of just the self-acceptance, right? I'm kind of on the side of Jake. I don't know if I would go back and tell 13-year-old me that I would, do anything different. I really think personally that when you get the opportunity to self-reflect, right, at a later point in life, what you start to realize is that when you're a teenager, you're so focused on the next 24 hours, the next 48 hours, and we grew up in an era where social media was just becoming a thing, so it was being wildly integrated into our lives. And it was the first time that we ever had 24/7 connection to both positive and negative influences. And what I've kind of come to realize is it's not so much going back and giving yourself advice, but I wish that I could go back and almost not interact, but watch what that was like rewatch my 13-year-old self going through X, Y, and Z things, because I always am so curious about why I was so concerned about what was going on at that time. And we talk about it, not mattering after 20 or whatever. And to Jake's point, it definitely molds you. And I'm mind blown at the fact that when I look back at my life, all of these different steps and abysses of high points or whatever else, they all have had specific things that I've taken from them. We wouldn't be sitting on this couch.
Right.
I think if we knew that we were on the top floor of this building, it would be hard to not just take your foot off the gas.
Right.
That
Right.
unknown really helps push you.
Yeah.
For me, I wouldn't give myself advice. I would be almost like that older brother figure. Yeah, you might feel this way now. That's normal type of advice. I don't even know if that's technically advice at that point, but just saying to someone, I know what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
I know how it is to give almost offer that level of comfort to relieve some of the stresses off of their shoulders. But at the same time, I agree. If we didn't have those, we wouldn't have pushed the gas so far down.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's a song by Brad Paisley, right? He's called Letter to Me.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts the song off by basically saying hey, to prove that this is me, I'm going to tell you about the Hustlers magazine and the can of chew that you have hidden under your bed that nobody knows about, to establish that trust almost.
Right.
But then the rest of the letter is just hey, I know it hurts being stabbed in the back by the girl that you took to prom. I know that it blows that you ran out of gas for X, Y, and Z. But he's that specific memory in that song is really cool to me, because he says, you know, when you took, I forget the girl's name, you took, we'll say Jessie, you know, you took Jessie out on a date and you ran out of gas. You're like, that sucked. And then he's like, actually, you know what? Never mind. He was like, that one ended up kind of cool. Mm-hmm. He was like, that one was a funny story. That one has everything else. And I want to use that song to kind of transition into this next portion, which is like, you know, here at Apex, and James has really been kind of biting into this premise, right? That every time you have a peak or a valley or an obstacle or anything, it's an opportunity to tell a story, right? It's an opportunity to write a section of your life chapters, right? From where we are now, with everything that's going on in the world and everything, you know, I guess, what are ways you think that people can look at things in their life maybe a little bit differently and start to identify those opportunities to form memories, have moments, and tell stories, rather than focusing on what they don't have because of X, Y, or Z?
I think that all starts from like looking at where you want to be, and maybe not looking directly at that, but like what surrounds it. So for me, like growing up, I wanted to play in the NBA. Like that was my childhood dream. Like LeBron was my hero. I met him at a basketball game. Like that was like my peak when I was a kid. That's what I wanted to do. But as I started like getting a little bit older and thinking more about it, there's never been anybody blind in the NBA. Like my chances of that are not very high. What else do I enjoy that also includes the NBA? And that's where I kind of turned on the switch to look at marketing, because it started out as I wanted to run video commercials, like the like short videos they play at the beginning to like show highlights from the last game or from that player. That's what I wanted to do. I like the creative and I like the basketball side of things. So I was like, let's just put two and two, one that I'm naturally talented with one that I wish I could or that I want, and how do I combine those two? And from there, it kind of, that was always my driver. Like in high school, I was in the business career tech because I wanted to learn about marketing. That's under business. So I did that. As I moved into college, I took a marketing degree. Didn't really like the first couple semesters because I wasn't really learning what goes into marketing. I was learning more of the foundations for it. But as I got out of those accounting classes and the econs and stats and all of those, and really dove into like the market analysis and the trends and the consumer behavior and all of those aspects, is when I realized like that's how that works and that's how they're doing it. Now, how do I get to that point? And by the time I got to that, the commercial video side was out of the window and the web tech side took over. And that's what led to Clear Vision Clothing. That's what led to learning how to do SEO on my own website before I tried to sell it as a service. That's literally like taking what you're naturally talented at, combining it with what you desire, your like career goals or your life goals, and finding that like middle ground between the two where you're happy but it's sustainable, is kind of where I took my path, and I believe I'm in the right spot now.
Yeah. Yeah. Jake has a very similar kind of experience in that avenue where you're like, you're passionate about this area, right? And spend so much time kind of like looking at this area and wanting to be there and everything. But he's sitting here as, you know, the right hand, the internal operations manager of a growing startup with a pre-med degree, because he was extremely passionate about medicine, endocrinology, like chemistry, science in general. And what I love about what you said, James, is like, it's less about the specifics of the career and more about, are you passionate about the end result of whatever you're doing? Like Jake, and I feel these sentiments too, just from nursing and everything else and the military and all that. in the end, I think all three of us sitting here just really want to help people and impact people. And, you know, for Jake, that was going to be medicine. But now it's helping a local business stay alive by helping them increase their sales online, you know, or using his creative talent to produce a video. You know, his logic that he learned in pre-med that he wouldn't have learned otherwise, really, that enhanced his natural talent for being able to see processes in pretty much anything. You know, I would be completely lost if he didn't rein me in every now and then and say, okay, you know, crackhead, you got to like lay out a couple of steps here. You're running a little bit too quick and nobody knows what's going on. And he just kind of like backhands me into reality. But I don't, would you share those sentiments, Jake? Or
Yeah. Well, it almost leads back to the last point of looking back on yourself. I think the most important thing about that is it establishes your humanity. And once you can look at yourself and identify your own humanity, you can apply it into your dreams, and it helps transform of what you think you are meant to do and what you ought to do. And that is very freeing once you find what you ought to do. Then you're able to put your nose to the grindstone and push yourself, even if it's a completely different opposite path of what you originally envisioned yourself going. But if you have that reflection of your own humanity, you're going to be able to apply it and help other humans. And that is what's important. If you're able to give yourself over and actually help grow another business that is struggling and help others, I think that's what's freeing about it.
Right. And I would just add, like, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, change it. Like, end of discussion. Like, if you're working and you don't enjoy it, that's not what you ought to do.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel like it's this weird split, and everybody that has listened to the Apex for whatever 60 plus episodes that we've done now knows that I love the word dichotomy, right? Jake used to make fun of me for it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I do really believe in a lot of these dichotomous splits, right? Where on one side of the tracks, you look at your deficits or perceived deficits, right? Your humanity. And you look at it as a limit, right? Everybody always sets this bar, right? You have to set a bar. You have to set a goal in order to reach the bar. I don't know how I feel about that, right? You almost don't want to set a top bar, but you want to set like a minimum bar that you're like, I will never give less than this amount of effort. And then allow what you're passionate about to guide where that top bar actually sits. Because you don't know. I am beyond myself with where I thought my top bar was going to be versus where it is currently. So the other side of that dichotomy is almost like when you feel misaligned, right? You are in a job, you're stable, you're making good money, but you still come home and just something isn't connecting. Mm-hmm. You know, you have a house, you have a white picket fence, you have a dog, you've got the American dream, right?
Yeah.
And I've really been grappling with this a lot lately, where you have a lot of the things that you thought, right, were going to make you happy a decade ago. You're like, if only I could be here, I'll be happy, mm-hmm. right? And what you realize is when you get there, if you're not doing what you ought to do, it causes a massive amount of dissonance in your head. And that's what I felt in the beginning of the year with nursing, or with the military, getting out of the military in January. Same thing with getting out of nursing in October. You know, like I knew that it's something that I was doing, but I couldn't put a finger on it at the time. Mm-hmm. But it's not what I was meant to be doing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question that we should maybe ask ourselves and try to sift it out, is how do I identify this is not what I ought to do? And you're only just going through the motions of doing something that you think you're meant to do. How do you find that dichotomy?
Right.
Like, what questions did you ask yourself, Jan, when you're like asking yourself, should I stay in the military or should I pursue this other pipe dream? Or should I stay in nursing or should I go casual? Should I minimize my casual and put in my 2 weeks? Like, what does that look like in your head, and maybe even in your head, James, of how do you look at those, ask yourself and reflect? Is it just taking that leap of faith? Or like, what does that look like? Because some people aren't fully aware that I should take that risk.
Right. And like, just from what you two have just said, like, it doesn't have to be a standard route. Like, I could have easily joined an agency and been sitting at a desk from 9 to 5 going home. But I worked in an agency. I didn't ever wake up before my alarms. I was always like rushing around in the morning to try to get to my internships or whatever. And since I started at Apex, I think there's been one day in the last 2 months that I haven't woken up before my alarm went off.
That was yesterday.
Yeah, that was yesterday.
Yeah.
But we've just been loading up over the last 2 weeks consecutively. And at some point you have to take a break or you're going to burn out at some point. But
I think that two perfect examples, like to really hone in this question that Jake asked is, and I'll start with you, James. Could you dive into the questions that you were asking yourself when you were talking to one of your mentors, right, Lori Moline, about whether or not you should accept a position with a growing startup or an established firm or an established agency? Like, what kinds of thoughts were going through your heads?
so they were like a balance or a mixture almost between the short and long-term goals that I have. The biggest one being buying a house. Me and my fiance moving in together, building our lives as adults together. Because to this point, she still lives with her parents. I live with my parents. I'm ready to move into that next step and what's going to allow me to get there. But that almost got pushed to the side, even though that is a big goal of mine. At the end of the day, after talking with Lori, after talking with Rachel, it was more of, do I want to sit at a desk and never interact with a client? Do I want to be given a task list where I'm basically being told what to do and how to do it? Or do I want to go with a startup that's still developing out these processes and kind of change that normal within that model to where it's not, here's what to do, here's how to do it, because that's not how I work. And I don't think the professionals that are coming out of college now or coming out in the next 5 to 10 years, that's not how they're going to work. They like to have creative freedom. They like to be able to think for themselves. They like to have options when it comes to what they're doing. And I think in my opinion, it was more of, do I want to be able to make a difference or do I want to just be another brick in the wall? And once I answered that question, and it's obvious which one I chose because I'm sitting here today. But once I made that decision, I sat down with Rachel again. I talked with Lori again, and I told them my point of view. And Lori said, if that's what my gut was telling me, go for it. Rachel said, if that's what everything inside of me is telling me to choose, she was fully supporting me. So like, even those people around you that may think your idea is a little bit off or it's not quite refined enough, like at some point they're going to realize that that's what your purpose is. And if it aligns with your passion, then
Right.
go full speed ahead. Like,
Right. I and it is actually perfect that you talked about like moving in with Rachel in that phase of your life, because it's going to lead to my answer to the question that Jake posed there. So when I was grappling with getting out of the military, that decision was vastly different for me than leaving nursing, right? Leaving nursing literally happened within 48 hours. trying to leave the military, and Jake knows this, was a 3-month depression battle, fighting with myself internally back and forth as to whether or not I should do it. Because I'm feeling myself tense up now, but like that was a difficult decision, to say the least, right? So at that time, though, I don't think I was paying close enough attention to not so much what my gut was telling me, but what, and I'm a man of faith, so like what God was putting in front of me as signs. And I think that that's the fundamental difference, is that if you want to be able to discern where you're going, your gut will point you in directions. But if you haven't trained that muscle, like we talk about the resiliency muscle, we talk about some of these other things, being able to pick up on signs or gut instinct is also a muscle. You have to learn how to pay attention to those things. Because honestly, getting out of the military, my gut was screaming that was a stupid idea, right? Mm-hmm. But there was this little piece, this whisper almost, that was like, no, trust me, this is the right move. And that's what was causing all the fighting, because for so long I was dealing with intuition. Like my gut is telling me to do this.
Was that so much of a little piece, or are you just trying to ignore the rest of that piece?
As far as like the little voice?
Yeah.
And that's what it might be, right? I was trying to compress that down almost, because I wanted to stay in. I viewed that as my passion, right? And that's kind of playing into the whole passion versus purpose thing. But then I got out of the military, I dealt with what it felt like getting out of the military, and then I was faced with this other decision, right? But from March to now, the amount of times, and me and Jake talk about this all the time, blissful serendipity, right? Things that pop up in your life that you can either look at as, wow, that was cool, that was lucky, or you can look at and be like, okay, this is a confirmation that even if my gut is scared of whatever path I'm thinking about going down, this is an affirmation that I should go down that path. And so for me, getting out of nursing, October 22nd was my last day as an ICU nurse, outside of being a clinical instructor. I had been phasing out slowly from full-time, part-time to casual or whatever, but that you came up to me and had me print out pay stubs for you to go and apply for a mortgage. And then subsequently, we're continuing to get approved for that mortgage because we are gaining momentum, we are gaining clients, and you and Rachel, you're able to accomplish a section of your dream because of something that we're doing here. Right. And from March to that moment, because of all the COVID stuff, I had it like beat into my head that it's not about necessarily where my gut was telling me to go, but what the world was trying to show me, And so I started thinking about it. And then that situation, you can either take that as a, wow, that's cool. But for me, that was a confirmation. It was an affirmation for me that Apex deserved my full attention. Even if it was just 16 hours a month working at the hospital. I could not in my head justify. I'm like, because literally like the week before I was asking God, I was like, hey, I don't know what's going on up there. I was like, there's a whole bunch of shenanigans happening down here. But I was like, I need something. I was like, I'm faced with this decision again. Show me something. Just being blatant, asking, do it, please, for the love of everything, because I'm lost. That happened. And I was like, cool, got it. The next day I sent my resignation, right?
Right.
Because I was done dealing with me trying to make the decision. But that's just for me, right? That's because I have a strong faith base, and that's where I put my stock. And so what I would say, whether you're a person of faith or you're not a person of faith or whatever, the best piece of advice I can give is sometimes the path that you're supposed to be going down is the one that your gut is the most afraid of. But fear is not the emotion that you should make decisions when it comes to your life.
And I am in the same boat, because when I was deciding agency or Apex, the agency was giving me a salary, and I was almost guaranteed to get that mortgage once I signed that contract to work there for X amount of years. With Apex, it was, we're going to phase you in 30 days, 60 hours. And Rachel was looking at me like, you're not really changing anything going from being a freelancer to being with them. And I said, well, that's only for 30 days. Give me 30 days. And once I came in and was able to show you guys what I was able to do, that 30 days went out the window in 4.
Yeah. Yes,
So,
it
like,
did.
I was afraid to take the Apex offer initially, but once I got over that initial fear and got through those first 2 interviews with you and RJ and meeting everybody that was involved with Apex, like, it was very clear once I had dipped my pinky toe in which one was the right option for me to take. Because I went and had the interview with the agency, and like, it was a place I would have enjoyed working, definitely, but for how long?
Right.
With Apex, like, I'm waking up before my alarm every day except for yesterday. I'm coming in, having a glass of orange juice, being able to sit and to listen to my music and get things done. But at the same time, I'm able to turn around and crack a joke or ask what's for lunch. Like, I'm not being like set into a schedule or a routine that I can't break if I don't want to.
I think one of the big things too is that you within the first 30 days could tell that all of us trusted your opinion, and that knew with the amount of work that you've put in, the amount of people that you've helped, and the type of person you are, right? Because you are one scrappy SOB. Jake might be a different story, but you're scrappy at least, and it's a big deal to you, I think, and to all of us really that are in here trying to not prove ourselves, right? Because I don't think that we're trying to do that. We know that we're valuable, right? But if you were at an agency and you said it, right, you may have enjoyed working there because of the culture, but would you have been able to exercise the creative brain that you have? Here, we understand how talented you are in so many different lanes. And I love just watching you run with things. Like, it's so cool. And Jake and I talk about this too. It's so cool to be able to say, hey, this is kind of a thought, right? And then you come back, you're like, hey, so I thought about this. Actually, I found like 3 other better ways to do it, and here's how we can implement it. Mm-hmm. Whereas maybe in different models, that doesn't happen. Those conversations don't happen because everything is segmented. They're all separated from each other. Web dev is on one side, creative is on the other side, the sales team is on the other side, but when you have a group of people and a culture that advocates for you to use every ounce of talent that you possess for the betterment of clients, for your betterment of yourself and the betterment of the organization, that's a strong, fundamental, different type of culture.
I didn't even fully understand that until we had that conversation with our first client, and you brought up I was either going to have to hire or take him out.
Yeah.
And at that point I was
Which is a legitimate thought. Like, I know I crack jokes about that, but there were literally times where I was sitting, I'm like, how am I going to outsmart this kid?
But hearing that from you, who is technically CEO, but we work side by side day in and day out. Once I realized how much freedom I had within this setting compared to the other one that was available, is where everything kind of opened up. If I was at an agency, I would have never been able to get an Apple developer license and develop a sticker pack. I would have never done that. I would have never been making Snapchat geo filters as a data analyst, as an SEO specialist. But my passions pour over into what I'm doing, and that allows me to take my job and bump it to the next level. Mm-hmm. And say, this is what's normal, this is what I'm doing. And that goes back to our original discussion of this is my new normal with the vision problem. Mm-hmm. But there's very few people that get told that they have a disability, and I put quotes around that because I don't like that term. But there are very few people that are given that either A, completely shut down, or the amount of people that have a disability that still operate at that normal level is a lot higher than people think. But the amount of people with that are going to that next level outside of normal is very small.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the things that drives me crazy about seeing people that don't have a disability or they do have a disability being comfortable in that normal position, working their 9 to 5 and having a hobby on the side that they do Saturday and Sunday. Like my younger brother tells me all the time that one of the guys he talked to said, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, even if it's not even if that passion isn't going to get you a Ferrari or a Rolex, or if it's enough to sustain and you love what you're doing every day, that's what you should be doing.
Right.
Not making that hobby a weekend activity. It should be your Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
And sometimes, like, for those of you that are out there that are listening to this and you're thinking, yeah, but I've been in my job for however long and I have insurance and I've got kids and, you know, all this other stuff. Because there are people in our lives that share those sentiments, right? They wish that they would have, you know, and then those what ifs start to sneak into their heads and start dismantling a bunch of stuff. And like to those people, I'll say this. Apex Communications Network started as a blog in a college apartment, became a podcast after a drunken escapade in Assisi, Italy, and now is a full-service brand strategy firm. It starts as a hobby on the weekend. It starts with one post.
Exactly.
But it has to start.
And that's like my sister. She has a degree in psychology, but she loves crafting. Her and I have been talking over the last 6 months on how do we turn her art into a revenue stream. And like we've explored like Etsy shops, we've explored Patreon. Like
I was just gonna say, with all the tech that's available today, you can do that.
Right. And like
it's fully possible with nothing but what's in your pocket.
Right. All you need to do is produce, and you can monetize just about anything you can produce.
Yeah.
And that is becoming more and more relevant as apps like TikTok take over. People that are dancing are now million subscribers getting brand deals for hundreds of thousands of dollars a month.
Right.
Like they're just dancing, but that's what they love doing. My sister, she loves creating crafts and art. And now we're exploring, she has that degree that she's not really using, but we're exploring how can she monetize what she loves doing. With Joey, it's video games. How can he create enough with that to sustain?
Right.
And then how can he go from just sustaining to that next level?
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, I think one major thing is once you step into the dark and you try that next step is you should be mindful or look for the validation. Like James took that step for that 30-day trial basically with us. It was validated through his ability of getting the loan. So like sometimes when you start working toward that, you'll get these little tidbits of validation and it will make the path that seems impossible seem possible and almost seem easy.
Mm-hmm.
You and I will run into all these occurrences where it just validates every single step that we've taken.
Yeah, and we can't predict them.
We can't even predict them or understand them half of the time, other than this is validating that this is where we ought to be, you know?
Yeah.
So it's...
And like going back to like when you and I first had a conversation back in September, I was sitting down with one of my clients and my client was telling me about something that Apex brought to them. And in my head, just sitting there talking to him, I was able to connect the dots based on what he was telling me and ask, are you talking about Jan?
Yeah, because you called me from...
And then he said, yeah, that's exactly who I'm talking about. Picked up his phone, called Jan, handed me the phone, and let me talk to him about that product that he was offering to the shared client.
Yep.
And that's what sparked everything. So like you can't predict anything like that. Like you said on that phone call, I wasn't expecting Nick to call me and it be James on the other end of the phone.
Right.
Like you can't.
Yeah.
And like that to me was like a normal client meeting when I walked in.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I got something cool to show you. And it was what you had presented to him. And like from there, that's what started everything with us. So it could start as something very small, and over time, those tidbits get larger and larger. And then by the time you know it, you're at one of your many apexes.
Yep. Hey, sequoia trees start as seeds.
Right. And like for me, when I was in college, like building Clear Vision Clothing, getting my LLC for Clear Vision Marketing, my milestones were having enough revenue to pay myself to go out, and mine was watches. So I was able to go out and get a new watch. So like it can be physical items, it can be interactions within people in your warm or cold network. It can be literally anything that provides that little bit of insight that you're on the right track. And like you take those, you enjoy them, and then you put your head right back down and you go full speed ahead until you reach the next one.
Yep. I agree.
And like you and I have calls at midnight, you and I have meetings at 8 a.m. Like we don't stop working at 5 p.m. And that's one of the things like about the way the world is. Like people hate Mondays. They love Fridays. They look forward to 5 p.m. on Friday. I'm more excited on a Sunday night for what we're going to talk about at Monday morning's team meeting than I am Friday when I'm sitting at home playing Xbox, being bored.
It's a beautiful thing.
So,
yeah. Well, I think that, this is for everybody listening, whether you're trying to figure out where you want to go in life, whether you feel like you've been through something that's given you a chip on your shoulder, you feel like you're currently dealing with anxiety, depression, mental health, on both sides, whether it's, a bunch of things are going wrong, or on the other side, something that I like to talk about is there's a bunch of things going right, and you're dealing with that weight of that newfound responsibility that's happening. I think that, by listening to this episode, that reaching out to us, any of us really in this room, that we've been there, and we're going to try to continue pushing ourselves and being as transparent as we can with these types of conversations, because the conversations that I've had with Jake have fundamentally shifted my life. The conversations that I've had with you, James, have fundamentally shifted how I, view things. And I think that too many people are not afraid, and not even taboo, but these aren't standard conversation starters. You don't go up to somebody and instead of saying, how's the weather today, you ask them, are you depressed? But us even having the ability to have this conversation today, I'm grateful that all of us were able to be in the room. I'm grateful that Lori Moline, plugged us in. I'm grateful that Nick set up that phone call, and that we're able to, I always think about lately, all of the stuff that Jake went through that put him here, that allowed him to share this moment with us, all the things that you went through that led to you sitting here and gave you the ability to share this moment with us, and the same thing with me. All of our lives accumulating to this point, and I am beyond excited to see where it goes from here. So thank both of you guys for hanging out with me in the living room today. And I'll leave it to you guys if you have any last words for the guests before we wrap up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think this is a good introduction to James for everyone that listens. And I would say just be mindful, and if you're looking back on your life, identify your humanity and how can you apply that to helping others. And just find that validation then. Just look for it. It might just be subtly in the background, but it is there once you start down that path.
My only thing is, if they tell you can't, more than likely you can. Just keep chasing it.
I love it. Keep chasing that apex, y'all. All right. Until next time, everybody, we will go ahead and cut out. So I hope everybody is staying safe and just for context, if you're listening to this, 5 years from now, we're still like right smack dab in the middle of our governor potentially shutting down the state again. But if there's one thing I can say after watching all of this stuff play out, is that we're going to take care of each other. So until next time, y'all, have a good one.
Take care.